Good morning. My name is Jamie Willis. I'm the Director of Family Justice Center Operations for Greene County. And I'm going to kind of give an overview of the Family Justice Center, how we got started, what we do, the services we offer, and then I can answer any questions that you have at the end. So I always like to start by defining what a family justice center is. It's such a unique model, and we're the only one in Missouri. So a lot of times people aren't familiar with the concept. A family justice center is a community-based collaborative organization with co-located agencies serving victims of domestic violence and other related victimizations like sexual assault, child abuse and neglect, elder abuse, human trafficking. What's unique about this partnership is that it's both public agencies like law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, Greene County as a whole, and also private agencies like our local domestic violence shelter, our local rape crisis center, mental health services, and we all work together as one multidisciplinary team serving survivors of domestic violence. This model is recognized as a best practice by the Department of Justice for serving victims of domestic and sexual violence. And like I said, while there are several hundred family justice centers across the country, we're kind of on an island here in the Midwest. We're a little bit ahead of the curve, and we're the only one in the state of Missouri. So, what is a family justice center? Like I said, there's co location of services, multi agency involvement from both public and private agencies. What's unique is that we have a centralized intake process. So, when survivors do come in looking for services, they don't have to do an intake with each different agency that we have on site. They do one intake with the Family Justice Center. And then, once they choose which agencies they'd like to work with, we can share their information with their consent. We place a priority on survivor safety. So, really, crisis intervention is at the heart of what we do, making sure we're keeping people safe, whether they decide to stay in that relationship or whether they're ready to leave. And also, we place a really high importance on confidentiality. So, when someone comes in, our services are completely confidential. They get to choose whether they want to work with law enforcement. And if they don't, then their information stays confidential. So, where we started, I like to start with a little summary of kind of what our community looked like before the Family Justice Center. Over the 15 years prior to us opening, we were seeing increasing rates of domestic violence. That's the total number of reported domestic violence incidents in our county for each year, about 15 years prior. Also, the child abuse and neglect reported numbers in Greene County prior to the Family Justice Center opening. You can see that we were at an upward trend, but Greene County frequently tops the state per capita in rates of reported domestic violence and reported child abuse and neglect. So it's definitely an issue that we have here in our community. Also, when someone decides that they want to access services, what we were hearing from survivors was that first, I have to figure out where I need to go for help and what help is available. I have to figure out how to get there. I have to get there, and then I have to do an intake at each agency. So these are all of the agencies that we have on site at the Family Justice Center. How long it takes to do an intake with that agency, how many miles between each stop, and about how long it takes to get there. And so what we found is that survivors were spending between 8 and 18 hours just trying to access services, traveling to each location, doing an intake before they could get the help that they needed. And domestic violence is a very complex issue where a lot of times you don't have much time to plan your escape. You're being monitored usually, you're being isolated from friends and family, you might not have transportation. And so when you start to look at all of the barriers to getting the help that you need, it can really feel like a daunting task for a lot of survivors. So when you couple scattered services that are inaccessible with the complexity of the criminal and civil justice systems, those of you that work in the courts know that it's incredibly complex. And if you are just a regular citizen who's never had to go through those systems, it can be really difficult to navigate. A lot of survivors felt like they were receiving conflicting professional advice. So they would go maybe to a nonprofit and they would say, you really need to talk to law enforcement. They would go to the police and the police would say, we've already taken your report. You need to call the prosecutor's office. And they felt like they were getting pushed kind of back and forth between the different agencies. There's also a lot of re-traumatization through having to retell your story. Many of the clients that we work with have been in really terrible situations where they've been threatened with weapons in their own home. sexually assaulted by their partner in their own home. And having to retell that story at each location you go to can feel really dehumanizing, and there's a lot of shame involved in that. Also, a lot of the survivors that we worked with have had previous negative experiences in the criminal justice system. So maybe they call for help, law enforcement gets there, they're really heightened, they're crying, they're screaming, their abuser is really calm, and he says, she assaulted me, and that person gets arrested. That's something that happens occasionally, even though we really try to make sure that we're arresting the correct party when law enforcement goes out. Other times, maybe a survivor didn't call 911, a neighbor did, and when they get there, that only escalates the violence from there on out. So with all of these different circumstances, it can be difficult for survivors to navigate the different systems, figure out what they need. And so we felt like we really needed a more coordinated community response with co-location of services. So we started our journey in 2014 here in Greene County. The Domestic Violence Task Force was started around 2014 because of the increasing rates of domestic violence we were seeing in our community. Over 20 different agencies participated in this task force, and they started studying the Family Justice Center model. In November of 2017, there was a general revenue tax increase that was passed, and it provided $500,000 for a partnership between local law enforcement and the prosecutor's office for a public safety initiative. In December of that year, Dan Patterson, who's our prosecutor, Chief Williams of Springfield Police Department, and Sheriff Arnott decided that they wanted to use those funds to start a Family Justice Center. The commission approved that budget in January, and then we really hit the ground running. Most other communities that I've talked to, it's taken over 10 years to start a Family Justice Center, and we opened less than a year later in October of 2018. When we did open, we opened in a very small little space that the commission let us borrow in our county courthouse. This is what it looked like back then. It's now a courtroom on the second floor next to victim witness, but we had about 10 to 15 different partner agency staff in these little cubicles, and we had 4 of these service areas. And when we first opened, we thought, well, are survivors really going to want to come to the courthouse and walk through metal detectors and be in the presence of law enforcement to get the help that they need? And we quickly found out that, yes, this was wanted and needed in our community. And we reached capacity of services within the first 3 months. So we knew that we needed a bigger space, a more permanent home, since this space was only loaned to us for a short time. So in August of 2019, after several months of working with Springfield Public Schools, we purchased this building, the former Dept Elementary School, for $10. As you can see, she needed a little bit of work, and we were very lucky with the support of the commission that we were able to borrow some funds from the future few years of our budget to make those initial renovations that we needed to move into the space. So we moved in June of 2020, at the height of the pandemic. And then shortly after, through a community impact program grant through ARPA funds through the county, us and our partner agencies received funds to complete the rest of the necessary renovations to the building. So this is what our building looks like now, which is much nicer and will last us for many, many years. So to give you an idea of the services that we have available and what that looks like, we have 9 different partner agencies that are at the Family Justice Center full-time. Harmony House and the Victim Center are our local domestic violence shelter and rape crisis center. They provide our navigator staff, which do a lot of different things. Number one, they provide advocacy services, so crisis intervention and safety planning. They assist with orders of protection that then we can file with the clerk's office from the Family Justice Center. That way, survivors only have to go to one location. We provide court advocacy at ex parte court each week. They do a lot of emotional support. The Victim Center offers free trauma-based counseling and support groups. And then Harmony House also is the largest domestic violence shelter in Missouri. So we can do intakes for shelter. And then also our navigators kind of act as care coordinators, coordinating all of the other services that we have available on site. We also have a team from Legal Services of Southern Missouri on site to offer basic legal advice and representation for things like orders of protection, divorce, child custody, landlord-tenant issues. A lot of times survivors, when they're on the lease with their abuser, they have a hard time getting off of that lease, so they can offer representation for that. But primarily, the biggest thing that they do at the Family Justice Center is provide free legal advice sessions. And there's no other place that you can do that here in Greene County. And so a lot of our survivors just want to know, if I leave with my children, what's going to happen? Am I allowed to do that? So they can provide those free sessions for them. We also have the Springfield Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit located within our center, and the Greene County Sheriff's Office Domestic Violence Detective. They work together almost kind of like a task force and serve any of the clients that we have that come in the building that want to make a report or have questions about law enforcement. But also any domestic violence incident that's reported to local law enforcement is then sent over to our investigation units for further investigation. And we have an advocate embedded within that unit that then does outreach to help connect people back to services in case they need assistance but aren't really wanting to participate within the criminal justice system at that time. We also house the domestic violence of the Greene County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. So once law enforcement investigates those incidents, they send those cases over to the prosecutor's office for charges. We have one attorney who is on site every week, and it rotates per week. So they're not in court that week. They're just reviewing charges and meeting with survivors. But they also have a full-time domestic violence paralegal and a full-time victim witness advocate within our facility. We also have 2 investigators from Children's Division. We're all mandated reporters, and so a lot of times whenever a client tells us about a situation that's dangerous that has children in the home, we then have to reach out to Children's Division. But having them on site allows us to coordinate that meeting a little bit easier so that survivors feel supported during that and so that we can advocate for them during that process. We also have Child Support Division on site for those who maybe have a child support order or need one or need enforcement of an existing child support order. And then we also have a team from Burrell Behavioral Health. One of the programs that Burrell has at our Family Justice Center that doesn't exist outside of the Family Justice Center is a crisis counseling program where we can get individuals into counseling usually within the first week of them accessing services. And for our clients that are escaping really traumatic situations and still have a really long journey ahead of them to stay safe and to keep their children safe, a lot of times receiving that immediate counseling is what allows them to continue with that process. They also provide assistance with other community resources. So if someone needs Medicaid, food stamps, TANF, child support or child care assistance, we can help with all of those applications, help them file those. If they need a copy of their driver's license or their birth certificate or their kids' birth certificates because they left without that, we can assist with all of those things as well. And then additionally, our team at Burrell serves as a point of entry into their larger mental health network. So if we have a survivor that is experiencing trouble with substance abuse or other mental health disorders, we can help get them the help that they need. So in addition to those on-site partners, we have a lot of off-site partners that I won't have time to talk all about today. But really the important thing is that our goal is always to find a survivor what they need without them having to navigate that themselves. So one of my favorite programs is our partnership with Rescue One. In 2020, we had so many survivors that were staying in their cars because shelter was full, or the only shelter that wasn't full wouldn't accept their dog. And they didn't want to leave their pets behind. And so we reached out to Rescue One, and they started a confidential pet fostering program in partnership with us in Harmony House. So having animals shouldn't be a barrier to getting the help that you need, so they can foster that animal until that person is in a safe place where they can be reunited. We also partner with Crosslines. They allow us to distribute pantry boxes because you have to have a piece of mail at your current address and a social security card to go to the food pantry. And that would be hard for me to produce right now. Everything's online. And so for our survivors to have that type of documentation is really difficult. So we can distribute food without that. We partner really closely with the forensic nurse departments at both Mercy and Cox, with the Child Advocacy Center. Harmony House also has a new program that they started with ARPA funds that provides emergency shelter at a local hotel whenever shelter is full for our high-risk clients, which is really, really helpful. So any need that isn't met, we really try to find a way to meet that together. So what happens when someone first comes in? We do a really quick check-in to identify first who that person is and who their abuser is so that we don't end up having the two people together in the building. And then they meet with a navigator. That navigator does a risk assessment with them, goes through some safety planning. We'll let them know what services we have on site, and then we'll put together a service plan. Usually that first day, we're looking at filing an order of protection, finding emergency shelter, all of those emergency things to ensure that person's physical safety. And then we also create a long-term plan so that we can follow up and make sure that we support them along that journey. So to give you an idea of what our services look like, what the capacity of services are, this is our numbers from 2024. And so you can see monthly we're serving between 125 and 170 unduplicated adult individuals per month, a lot of times, and their children too. I can tell you that this is at capacity. So this week alone, I meant to look at the numbers before we left, but I think yesterday we turned away 4 people and asked them to come back another time because we just didn't have anyone to assist. A lot of that is because staffing is difficult, and I know that most of you in your departments probably have the same issue. It's hard to hire, it's hard to maintain employees, but it's particularly hard in a field where there's a lot of vicarious trauma. And a lot of our staff are listening to the worst of the worst day after day, and that becomes really difficult. So there is a lot of turnover. So last month in May, we served 146 unduplicated adults in their household. And since we opened in October of 2018, we've served over 10,000 individuals. I always like to share client feedback because this is not a fun thing to talk about, but it really makes it worth it when you hear from survivors how much easier it was to get the help that they needed when they came through the Family Justice Center. So here's just a few things that some of our clients have said. I'll give you a couple seconds to just read that on your own. All right. I also always like to share pictures of our team because these are the amazing individuals that do this work. And it's a really unique model having advocates and attorneys and law enforcement and social workers all in one building. And although we all have the same goal, we don't always necessarily agree on how to get there. But our team is really amazing and works so well together. So I always like to show our group and the great work they do. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So, where does the majority of your funding?
That's a really good question. So we have a small budget through Greene County. Right now, our current budget is at less than like the resolution amount for that project. It's at a little under 500,000. That pays for my position. Courtney, who is our program support specialist who assists me. And then also for some of our navigators that are contracted through the county. We also have other funding through state, local, and federal grants. And that varies from year to year. Our largest grant is through VOCA, which is the Victim of Crimes Act. And that covers 2 of our 6 navigators and supplies and things like that. Most of our staff, though, 90% of the staff in our building are funded by their own home agencies. So we provide a desk, a phone, internet service, which is actually provided through the city of Springfield. They take care of that for us. And then they provide their staff to work permanently within our building. Any other questions? Yeah.
do an amazing job helping the people in need. My first thought was getting KY3 and others to promote, but then I see you're over full anyway, so why advertise for more when you can't take more? But my other question is, and I don't know what the answer to this is, do you see the rates of domestic violence beginning to turn? Are we putting the abusers in jail? I have a real heart for the abused and no heart at all and compassion at all for the abuser. So I just don't know, how do we fix this?
That's a really good question. The criminal justice system takes so long, and for good reason, right? Like, we want to protect the rights of the accused. We don't want someone to be able to come in and say, this person abused me, and then that person go to jail forever without any physical proof. The problem with domestic violence is that usually it's a he said, she said, because there's no other witnesses present. Victims are coerced into not participating in the criminal justice system. And a lot of times, once they're in a safe location, we call it poking the bear. And so if you are safe, survivors don't want to go through 3 years in the criminal justice system just to poke the bear and make that person angry and make them retaliate against them. So there's a lot of factors that make it really difficult to criminally prosecute offenders. I will say that the Family Justice Center model statistically is much more successful, partially because victims feel more supported, and so they're more likely to report to law enforcement when they come through a Family Justice Center. Cases are usually stronger because of that multidisciplinary collaboration. There's a reduction in case dismissal and an increase in felony conviction when you come through a Family Justice Center model. There's also a dramatic reduction in domestic violence homicides, which is our ultimate goal. And so in the 5 years prior to the Family Justice Center opening, a third of homicides in Springfield, Greene County were domestic violence related. And that number now is at around 10%. So we've already seen a reduction in domestic violence homicides since we've opened. I don't know if I answered your full question.
Well, you did. And you're giving hope to people who seem to be hopeless or feel hopeless at some point, giving them a future.
Yeah. As far as addressing the situation, though, one thing to keep in mind is that abusers statistically are very likely to have been abused as children. And so if you grow up in a home where domestic violence is present, the likelihood that you become a victim as an adult or you become an abuser as an adult is like tenfold. And so it's really important that we hold abusers accountable, but it's also really important that we provide children with the support that they need to be able to transform that trauma that they're experiencing so they don't transfer it to someone else as an adult. And that requires a lot of money. Yeah.
Law enforcement individuals inside. Did you guys hear?
We have a lot of protections in place because of that. So our facility is locked down. You have to ring a doorbell to enter. Once you enter our facility, let me go back to pictures real quick. Maybe. Can you make that big for me? Okay, thank you. So in the top left is our lobby. So it looks really welcoming, right? And we really try to make it look welcoming, but all the doors outside of that little area are locked. There's another level of security to get to the second floor. So our security is our facility is very secure because we do worry about someone being followed to our center. It's one of the questions that we asked during our initial intake. Could you be followed or tracked? We also have panic alarms in all of our service areas. So our advocates can hit a button and law enforcement immediately comes running to that space. And knock on wood, we haven't had to use that yet. So it is something that we're concerned about, but it's also something that we take a lot of precautions in to make sure that our staff and our clients are safe.
Have you ever had an instance, and how is it handled, or how would it be handled if you had an instance where, say a victim came in, and you put their name
Yeah, that does
judge
happen.
was saying they were the victim, do you turn away since you're already helping one person, or you just make sure they don't have a conflict?
Yeah, so we call that instance the race to the courthouse. A lot of times, abusers will take advantage of the criminal and civil justice system to further abuse their victim, and so we have had both parties access services at the Family Justice Center. Initially, our goal is not to determine who the primary aggressor is in any situation. So if someone needs help, we're going to help them. Since our services are geared towards helping someone plan on how to stay safe, if you're an abuser and you come to our center, you're likely not going to get anything that's going to benefit you. But it's pretty easy to determine after some time meeting with a party whether they're actually a victim or not. And when you work with like 8 to 10 survivors a day, you kind of get a feel for that. But we don't deny anyone services. But if one party is in our building and the other party comes in, we will either have the other person come back or we will make sure that they're in separate areas of our facility. So it is something that we keep an eye on.
Once you go back to telling them to come back.
We just say we don't have anyone available and that they can come back later or that we can call them. Since we have so many different locked parts of our facility, though, it's pretty easy to keep people separate. And it's rare that we have two people at the same time. It's usually like the next day the other party comes in. 2 minutes. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. If you do have any questions, my contact information is up here. We don't have county phones, so you can't just dial an extension. You have to do the whole number. But feel free to give me a call if you do come up with any questions or email me. Thank you.